This is Mrs. Beck, and today we're going to be learning a little bit more about those food webs and food chains that Mystery Doug talked about yesterday in science. And so today what we're going to be talking about is a little more in depth about how do animals get the energy that they need to survive, to make more living things, to grow, and that sort of thing. And before we really get into what do animals do to get energy that they need, we really have to start with the plants on our planet. Because without the plants, the animals won't make it. So one of the characteristics of all living things is that they have to obtain, which means get, and use energy. So for plants, that means capturing energy from the sun's rays and then using that to help it produce food. And what happens is they take in the sunlight, the rays of sun coming in, and they also they breathe in carbon dioxide through the leaves, and that's something that we breathe out, so that makes us kind of connected to plants. Then they also mix in the nutrients that can be found in water, and when they mix them all together here in their leaves, they go through a process called photosynthesis. This is what we call the actual production of their food. It's called photosynthesis. And the green stuff that's in here called chlorophyll, that also helps the plant to do its job of creating energy for itself. And the word photosynthesis actually kind of comes together as kind of a cool word. Photo has to do with the word sun or light. And synthesis means to make something. So literally the process of photosynthesis means to make something out of light. So that's what the plant is doing, is making its own food. Any food that does not get used by the plant for its own life activities, such as making berries or seeds or growing, gets stored in different parts of the plant. So because they produce their own food, plants are called producers. And what happens is those producers help out the animals because they do not produce their own food. They have to consume it by eating plants or by eating animals that eat plants. So for this reason, animals are called consumers. So plants are called producers, animals are called consumers. So let's talk now a little bit more about those food chains and food webs. Mr. Doug didn't really talk too much about food webs, so we're going to go a little bit deeper than what he did. Some animals eat plants and get that energy that's been stored in the plant. And those animals that eat only plants are called herbivores. And they might just graze and nibble plant material. Other animals get their energy by eating the plant eaters. So if an animal eats only other animals, it's called a carnivore. Animals eat both plants and animals are called omnivores. Omni means all. Some animals, called scavengers, get their food from dead organisms. So some animals have to eat the things that are already dead. So they get their energy from that. Food chains and food webs are both ways that we can show how animals get the energy they need. A food chain shows how energy is passed from one organism to another in an ecosystem. And remember, an ecosystem has to do with a place where animals and plants live together. But on the other hand, a food web can show several connected food chains, so it gets a little bit trickier there. So we're going to take a quick look here at a little video, kind of explains food chain versus food web. You might want to turn down your volume just a little bit because it comes out a little bit louder when I play this. So here we go.
Today we will learn about the food chain. Most of us enjoy eating our favorite food, whether it's pizza, a crisp apple, yummy roasted chicken, a crunchy bite of chocos, or any other food item. Eating is not just for the deliciousness it brings. Actually, we need energy for whatever we do, from playing a favorite sport to studying for a science test or roaming around with your friends. The same thing is applicable to every living organism on Earth. These cute rabbits, tiny beetle, naughty squirrel, beautiful fish, lovely flowers, and these trees. If it's alive, it needs energy. Ah, where does this energy come from, and how does it get passed around to all living things? Energy passes from one organism to another as they eat plants or any other one. This flow of energy from one living thing to another living thing is called a food web or a food chain. We humans get our food from animals and plants. Plants make their own food. They use carbon dioxide from air, sunlight, and water from soil to make their food. This process is known as photosynthesis. So, now you are clear that plants make their food. We humans and other living organisms depend on plants for food. Now, look closely. A deer is coming. Oh, it's eating the plant. Species that eat only plants and herbs are called herbivores. Oh my gosh, a lion is coming in and it's in an attacking mood. Lions and other species that eat other animals are called carnivores. Just now, you have seen a small food chain. Plants make their own food. Other animals eat plants, and they are eaten by other animals. You can say directly or indirectly, we all depend on plants for food. This food chain began with plants. Plants are the producers because they produce food. The species that eat plants are known as primary consumers, and the species that eat the species that is dependent on plants directly is called secondary consumers. Now you see a not so noticeable part of this food chain. These are bacteria and fungi in soil. When animals die, these bacteria and fungi decompose their dead bodies. They become nutrients, and these nutrients are again used by the plants to make food. These bacteria and fungi are called decomposers. They are also a very important part of a food chain. Now, look at this food chain. The grasshoppers eat grass, and they are eaten by the frog. The snake eats the frog, and the hawk eats the snake. The hawk dies and is decomposed by the bacteria and fungi, and becomes nutrients that is used by the grass. The food chains that we see, which has one producer, one primary consumer, and one secondary consumer, and decomposers, is called a simple food chain. A food chain is a simple version of what actually happens in nature. But everything is not so simple. This looks complex. In this chart, grass can be eaten by both rabbit and grasshopper, and this mouse can be eaten by both the snake and the kookaburras. Also, this snake can be eaten by the eagle and kookaburras. So a food web is a network of food chains by which nutrients and energy are passed on from one species of living organisms to another species. Now you know about food chains and food webs. Can you show the diagram to your friends? Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more videos.
So now you've seen the difference between a food chain and a food web. The food web tends to be a little more complex. So in a food chain, it shows how the energy is passed from one organism to another in an ecosystem. And it's important to know that eco, that prefix, means relating to the environment. And system is a set of connected things that work together for a particular purpose. You might have learned that word in Project Lead the Way because you probably worked with some systems there. So let's take a look at this little food chain. Of course, we're going to start here with a producer, the grass. The grasshopper eats that. Frog eats the grasshopper. Snake eats the frog. The hawk eats the snake. And then when the hawk dies, its body is eaten or decomposed by the fungi, or mushrooms in this case. So one thing to be aware of is that a first consumer, that'd be the first thing that eats the plant, is called a primary consumer because it is first. And usually the word primary means first. So then when we go to the frog, he's the second thing that is in this food chain. He's called a secondary consumer because it actually has the word second. So he's the second eater. So we start with producer. Eater number 1 is the primary. Eater number 2 is the secondary. Now we come to eater number 3. Number 3 is the snake. He is the tertiary. That's a fancy word for the number 3. Tertiary consumers are the third ones to eat. The final consumer is the hawk in this food chain. It could go longer, but we're going to keep it simple for our thinking purposes because we're going to think of this hawk as the final consumer. So primary is the first, secondary is the second eater, tertiary is the third consumer or eater, and hawk being the final, the last one to eat anything else, is the hawk. The decomposer just becomes a different phase of the food chain, so we don't consider it as consumer because what it's doing is absorbing nutrients. So it's using it to make its own food. So food web, model that shows many different things feeding off of each other and the relationships that they have. And remember, they pretty much always start with energy from the sun. That's super important to know. The sun starts pretty much every single food chain because without this guy, the grass can't grow, the grasshopper can't eat, the frog can't eat, the snake can't eat, the hawk can't eat, and finally the fungi can't do their job either. Now let's take a look at a food web. Again, these are they're a little bit more confusing because lots of things can do some of the same things. So in this one we have mice that eat grass and insects that use the pollen. So then, mice might eat insects every now and then, but frogs definitely do, and sometimes snakes do, depending on the insect. But that mouse, he could eat the grass, but then be eaten by the snake. He could also be eaten by the fox. He could also be eaten by a cougar. And this rabbit, poor rabbit, he could eat this little bush. Then he could become dinner for the fox or the cougar. The deer, though, look at what happens here. He's eating the grass, of course. And really the only thing that's going to eat the deer, if you see this one arrow, is just the cougar. So the cougar becomes pretty much the final consumer because he might even eat a fox. Not very often, but he might. So this web is all interconnected by these arrows, and the arrows, you can tell, point to what would eat the next thing. So the arrow goes from the grass to the mouse or the bug or the deer, and then the energy, which is represented by this arrow, shows where that animal's energy would go next. So animals do get food from their habitats. They have lots of adaptations that help them obtain the food that they need to survive. And adaptations are just body parts or behaviors that help them to survive in a certain kind of environment. And many animals have adaptations that have developed to help them get the correct kind of food. So herbivores, we know, eat plants. They graze on plants. And the reason you can tell that this guy is an herbivore is that they usually have flat front teeth for ripping up the plants. Okay? And then they have teeth at the back that they use to crush and grind the plants. So think about another example of what might be an herbivore that you know. Maybe cows or deer. So here's some deer using their flat teeth for grinding that plant material. Carnivores are meat eaters. They are usually predators. such as lions, owls. They have strong legs or sharp claws to catch their prey, and their sharp teeth help them to tear apart and eat their prey. If it's an owl, we're going to see some sharp talons and that sort of thing. So let's take a look. Here's an owl. He's got sharp talons and a very sharp beak for helping to tear apart their prey. They also hunt, and they have certain behaviors that they do to help them hunt. Carnivores like a lion, this one's pretty cool. Look at this claws that also used to catch their prey. So lions and other big cats also use a behavior called pack hunting, and they also sneak up on herds of herbivores. They usually hunt in groups and use tactics to confuse their prey so they can more easily catch it. Hawks, perfectly still. I know you've seen them before. So they don't spook their prey into trying to escape. And then when the time is right, these stealthy predators spring quickly onto their prey. Poor rabbit. Omnivores, though, eat both plants and animals. And animals that eat both plants and animals tend to do things that they have lots of different behaviors that they do. Well, we're omnivores, of course. Did you know that some bears and even rats are omnivores? So check out the bear. Not only does he know how to pick berries, but he also knows how to stand into a stream and catch fish. So, behaviors and body parts help these animals function in their food chain to catch their food, to get their food, but it's so important to remember that all food chains start with the sun. So you may end this video now. You're going to be taking some notes here shortly in your science notebook. And I'll be going over those notes with you so that you can get them filled in just right. Remember that you will have glued those into your science journal. So thanks for learning with me today, fifth graders. I'll see you soon.